Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories.
But you do buy his confidence with true stories?
You buy his confidence and set him up. We've seen this happen recently with Jack Anderson, for example, who has his intelligence sources, and he has also admitted that he's been set up by them. You know, every fifth story just simply being false. You also work on their human vulnerabilities to recruit them in a classic sense, to make them your agent so that you can control what they do, so you don't have to set them up sort of, you know, by putting one over on them. So you can say, here, plant this one next Tuesday.
Can you do this with responsible reporters?
Yes, the Church Committee brought it out in 1975, and then Woodward and Bernstein put an article in Rolling Stone a couple of years later. 400 journalists cooperating with the CIA, including some of the biggest names in the business.
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Definitely exactly what we expected. The reality of where this is going is so infuriating for people that continue to fall away from the two-party illusion. One of the main things I'm going to discuss today, or rather kind of the overarching point that goes through all we're going to discuss today, is how the two-party illusion, the main point we're always highlighting, really does stop people from seeing the bigger picture. And through that, stops you from ever truly solving the problems causing, you know, the problem or what we're dealing with today, and the government manipulation and so on. And so today, for example, we're going to discuss the riots, protests, the intermix of both, what's going on in LA. If you, which recently I shared, actually, I didn't get the chance to show it on the last show. I saw it right afterward. Catherine Austin Fitts had highlighted some things that are circulating. A lot of people are pointing out, which is, by the way, the same thing we said last time. I forget what the story was. It's always the case. In every circumstance like this, you will find people, whether it's because they saw the opportunity afterward or because they made it happen from whole cloth, that you will find political entities who are funding and involved with everything like this, whether it's causing the chaos, just wanting their signs out there, or the absolute, destruction of this country. But what's important to consider is whether or not that's part of the government agenda and not necessarily the one side trying to trap the other, which there are obvious points that you can frame there are times in which there are people within these elements that are going after each other. The reality, though, is what we can see in LA. Really, I'm actually really surprised to see how many large prominent accounts on left and right are seeing this and calling it out. But the reality of, like, let's say Palantir or the surveillance state or any number of ongoing developing agendas that very clearly are being eclipsed by this story. Now, that's not to say that it has to be one versus the other. They can both exist at the same time, but recognize how even real events are used to hide very important and uncomfortable stories in the establishment, in the government. And so when we see things like this, you obviously ask about the local sort of immediate outcomes or agendas involved, but also stand back and ask yourself whether this is feeding into a all of government agenda. If they can divide people at party lines, if they can create this kind of chaos, what does it always lead to? From left or right, calls for reduction of rights, or rather the lack, acknowledgement of your inherent rights. They call for more unconstitutional legislation. Or in this case, we can see more militarization. We can see, I mean, everything we're talking about, the rationalization of the very Palantir story that even Republicans were upset about. I mean, even like we'll point out right in the beginning, no, I think that's later, but we're going to talk about some points that relate with her from the very beginning of Loomer saying, bring out Palantir to go after the immigrants. It's transparent how obvious this is. Now, I'll even say it again, even if it's exactly what you think, and it's somehow the left, George Soros funded, going after, I guess, the right. When I guess it's even feels silly even saying that when you recognize that it's all the government is clearly involved with the agenda from left and right across the board. That's why it's hard for me not to call it naive and childish, because it is patently obvious. You can look and see that both sides of this paradigm are completely invested in what's going or what's building and what's happening. But so if you want to make the argument that it's just the left going after one of the other sides, you also have to recognize all the different moving parts within this that really also first, the different parts you're ignoring to make that make sense, but realize how that, even if it's just one side, is achieving the agenda that is an all of government goal, which has to be acknowledged and really isn't, as usual, by the partisan conversation. So we're going to go through all of that and discuss the different overarching points and different agendas that are coming through this a mix of things. You have people creating violence. Now, I don't know if whatever the word riot means to you definitely makes a difference. If it's one person doing something that's violent, is that a riot? If it's 10 of them, is that a riot? That's my point. There's violence. That's clear. If there's a mass mob of people all running and causing a breakaway, I'm not really seeing it the way that would be normally described. Nonetheless, it shouldn't be ignored that there are people creating violence, and that could be people that are out there doing it because they hate Trump or because they think it's a left versus right paradigm thing. But there's also a whole lot of people out there who are protesting because whether they're right or not, by the way, and they are right, but whether they are or not, that ICE is committing crimes, or that your government rather is committing crimes against the American people, which is how you should really see it. And again, whether they're right or not, they're protesting these things in a way that they're allowed to, or, within their constitutional rights. And now we're getting the same thing we see, the same point I made about the trucker convoy. Because you wore red hats and one guy waved the Nazi flag, suddenly you're all Nazis, you're all domestic terrorists, and now we have to shut this down. And to the rightful cries of that's unconstitutional. You can't just broad stroke everybody here and say that we're all the same thing. You'd imagine that logic would cascade into any other conversation. Sort of like the exact same thing now happening in reverse. Homan and the rest saying that the speech is causing violence and we have to shut that down. We're sending in the military, which is a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. And yes, it is what's happening. Despite the screams of people even saying, I swore to the oath to the Constitution, I know better than you. Well, you can swear an oath to something doesn't mean you understand the reality of it, or that partisanship won't blind you to what's real. The bottom line is always is that this is you're not allowed to deploy the military domestically, unless it is within the Constitution or within a congressional act, which is the specifically cited the Insurrection Act. An executive order simply saying you can do this does not make that legal. Now, even if they're just standing around, but reality being that if you're going to pretend, and the nuance is that if they are not, that they have to be enforcing the law to somehow make that the case. If we're going to pretend that you've got thousands of National Guard, which still applies to that as well, and hundreds, if not over 1,000 Marines that are just milling around and directing people on what to do. I mean, this is the game we keep playing with, even like the immigration point. We'll talk about Garcia today. This idea that somehow we all don't know what's going on. Like we all don't know that you knew damn well you could do that. You're pretending that you don't know how. And I can't smuggle Garcia back into the country. Like we all knew what was happening there. They're playing a game of chicken with the Supreme Court, which they clearly lost and still pretending like they won. We'll talk about it again today with some additional points. But it's the same thing here. And I think we all can recognize this and be honest with ourselves about the game. Maybe you're on his side, but nonetheless recognize and acknowledge that they're being quite childish about the way that they're playing this game. I can go off on a lot of examples, but that entire kind of story, the LA riot protest, how it's being dealt with, is absolutely being used in many different ways to achieve pretty much the main agendas we've been discussing. And so it behooves all of us to call this out to understand how it's being used. And weirdly enough, the people on the right would be the ones that would call this out with far less evidence in any context if it related to the Democrats. Same kind of point we made back and forth, but I'll call it credit to the conservative side being more willing to consider things that the left might be more willing to ignore when we should be considering everything. That's my point, is you'd expect them to be a little bit more aware of this one guy waving a Mexican flag and how weird it is. Now it's surrounded by a bunch of media. No one else seems to be around. And it seems odd, doesn't it? Now ask yourself, if it's a funded left thing and they're doing this because they're trying to orchestrate something, how does that make sense to you? How does the left orchestrating that make sense to benefit the agenda that you claim the left has, which is fighting for these immigrants to be there, to use them, to vote, right? Like, take a second and think about the absurdity of the partisan back and forth right now. How does that make sense to you? My point is it is being orchestrated like we can see in almost every situation, but it's being done from a government perspective, and the wedge issues are being thrown at you by the usual culprits. So we'll talk about that. We're going to start with a point about a channel called the MEMRI, and I'll give you the acronym in a second, or what it stands for. And apparently Al-Qaeda is threatening to assassinate Musk and Trump and all of this, which wouldn't surprise me. But even if it's the case, let's recognize Al-Qaeda is a proxy element of Israel and the United States. So basically, Loomer and Jones are reporting that Israel and the United States are threatening to assassinate Trump and Musk, which even to you, that might make sense. But realize how silly it is to point at this channel that is a propaganda entity and keep telling us that what they're saying is the reality about Palestine, about immigrants, and how Israel is propagandizing us through these channels to create the very hatred that they're using to drive all of this into reality, to get you to hate your neighbor, to attack people who have been here legally for a long time, fighting for citizenship, or already have it, and are being thrown out of the country because they said something bad about a country that we're not allowed to talk about, and how that overlaps with the immigration conversation in general, and some important developments around the Alien Enemies Act, and how a court has now argued that it was unlawful, which it is, and was, and it is. And that's what's so infuriating about the defensive people acting like you just don't understand, or you're too much of a coward to call these things out, when it is basic. As Bruce Fein has discussed, you can walk through the legislation or the law and make it. We'll go through it today. There's not an invade. You can't prove it by the requirements of this law that there is a state actor, first of all, behind what's happening. Secondly, that is a mobilized armed force who is invading this country as one entity. Even their argument is that it's the scattering of immigrants because Biden did it all. But then somehow it's Venezuela, and that's why it's allowed within this act. It's completely clumsy. And so we're going to go over the court ruling on that and why it's important, and end with some important stuff around a few different things. But let's go into this channel that I really think you should see. Now, I've talked about this already. The reason I actually didn't already do a focus on this is because Robert was going to do an article, and I forget what happened. Something else came up, or we pulled back on writing in general. And this channel is you will recognize it right away. Every one of these major videos you get of like a leader of the Hamas movement saying this, or Al-Qaeda saying that about what they want to do, and it all is like you might as well be hearing what Israel wants you to think about what they're doing and saying. Now, that's not to say that they're not videos of people doing things. The point is, it's like taking video out of context of anybody out there, a preacher somewhere in the world that says this is what we all want to do, and then claiming that represents everybody in the Republican Party. That's the abstract nature of all of this. And on top of that, don't forget, again, that the people we're discussing, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all of these discussions, even Hamas, for crying out loud, was funded by Israel up until October 7th. We've talked about this. So you have to understand the influence, which is that they are feeding these narratives through people like the Loomers of the world to get you thinking that this is your biggest enemy, when in reality, it's the one who is stoking all these things to get you to attack yourselves under the guise of fighting some invading force. Not to say that there's not illegal immigrants, not to say that there's not an overlapping issue to be discussed within that, but we are being weaponized against ourselves by somebody who is being framed as our chief ally. So this clip here is shared by Loomer. It's really not. It's a minute long. It's a guy sitting here saying, as the first practical and immediate measure, I call upon every Muslim and in the infidel, criminal, and arrogant United States, and it does not matter if they are Arab American or of the descent. And basically kill everybody. And it mentions Trump. It mentions Elon. The absurdity of pretending, like, think about how that even makes sense. So now you're telling us that this religious effort that is only about going after the other is now saying kill everybody, including people that. It's about irrational fear. It's about creating the kind of idea, and I'm going to get into what this channel is, the MEMRI channel. Well, again, it's actually, I forgot to, I'll give you the acronym really quickly. I forgot to write that down. The Middle East Media Research Institute. Typical, right? Now, what they won't report, Loomer or Alex Jones, or all the rest of them going, oh, clutching their pearls and screaming about how we're about to get attacked by somebody, because according to him, we're already in World War III with Russia, but we forgot about that, apparently. Don't mind all the nuclear bombs flying everywhere because that's happening over there, but we're just not talking about it. Or it's not, and it was a bombastic story that was used to distract from Palantir. You can decide all that, because clearly we're in World War III. The point is that this platform is created by an Israeli intelligence officer and was largely completely run by Israeli intelligence officers for a pro-Zionist outcome until a lot of that was scrubbed off the internet. You can ask Grok, by the way. I guess that part slipped through his reporting. He forgot to include it, right? But as Laura says, it's time for Republicans to crack down on Islam in America. Don't forget that she said the same thing about the recent protests, saying, see, I told you it was going to be a jihad summer, except we're talking about now Mexican invasion, I guess, even though 30 seconds before that, it was all Americans protesting about ICE, right? But now it's Mexicans invading the country. And we're talking about the same thing, though. See, moments later, the partisan narrative shifts to whatever, sounds very Israeli propaganda-like. The report says Al-Qaeda leader called for American Muslims to wage jihad and also for the assassination of American officials, including Trump and Vance and Elon. Right. So, obviously possible. Realizing again that these are people that they funded for a long time, and ask yourself why that makes sense in any context and what that will do for their agenda. They can point to this just like she is and call for more action. And what does that look like? It looks like everything we're seeing today. Whatever the point is, whatever the issue is, it seems to always take the same solution form. Probably Palantir, probably less rights, probably a censor, all the things we're talking about through Israel, through censorship, anti-Semitism, all the same stuff we're talking about. Or, of course, biometrics and surveillance. And again, Jones, Al-Qaeda leader calls on Islamists to launch terror attacks. Now, just the reason we're including this today, one is because of the Israel overlap with the ongoing immigration crisis in this country, but recognizing that this is exactly what they're trying to use to foment the kind of pushback against anybody with a different skin color in this country. And I'm not saying that racism is the point. That is the ploy, you understand. This is not a left versus right, woke versus, that's not what we're talking about here. This is about the idea of creating the threat, the other, to rationalize what comes next. That's Iraq, that's Syria, that's everything we're talking about here. Now, just in case, and we're going to go through this, you could read this, it's not very hard to find, but even just in case it matters, actually, I did write that to him, even Grok, which is the point, and this is something you should research, everything should be researched before you start looking to the AI information, but it says that platform was founded by Israeli intelligence, Alex. Even Grok will tell you that. Did your sources not give you that important tidbit, or do you just not care? Now, here is what even Grok will say. The Middle East Media Research Institute, which operates the MEMRI-TV, which is what they were just showing, that's that red logo, was co-founded in 1997 by Yigal Karman, a former Israeli military intelligence officer and counterterrorism advisor to Israeli prime ministers. Now, there's a lot more you can read on that. The main point of this is, and this is from The Guardian, it's 22 years ago. Clearly a different conversation today from all corporate media. Here's what their report said back in 2002. The organization that makes these translations and sends them out, that's what they argue their main point. We just translate what Muslims are saying in the world. And it says, is the Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI, based in Washington, but with recently opened offices in London, Berlin, Jerusalem. It says what is it, just memory, MEMRI? That's actually interesting. Memory's purpose, MEMRI's purpose, according to its website, is to bridge the language gap between West, where few speak Arabic, and the Middle East by, quote, providing timely translations of Arabic, Farsi, and Hebrew media. Of course, to most people that are of the mind to watch these channels, see them all as one thing. Despite these high-minded statements, several things make me uneasy whenever I'm asked to look at a story circulated by MEMRI. First of all, it is rather mysterious organization. Its website does not give the names of any people to contact, not even its office address, which is ridiculous for a group that's claiming to want to absorb information and read, a media platform. If it's a group that would be taking in people, things that are being sent to report on, then they would have a way to reach out. It says the second thing that makes me uneasy is that the stories selected by MEMRI for translation follow a familiar pattern. Either they reflect badly on the character of Arabs, or they in some way further the political agenda of Israel. I'm not alone in this unease. Ibrahim Hooper of the Council on American Islamic Relations told the Washington Times, MEMRI's intent is to find the worst possible quotes from the Muslim world and disseminate them as widely as possible. Now, of course, that alone will be disregarded as, well, that's just because they're all terrorists. Typical from people that would think that. Evidence from MEMRI's website also cast doubt on its nonpartisan status. Besides supporting liberal democracy, civil society, and free markets, or at least stating that, the Institute also emphasizes, quote, the continuing relevance of Zionism to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel. That is what the website used to say, but the words about Zionism have now been deleted. That's back in 2002, mind you. The original page, however, can still be found on the archives. The reason for MEMRI's air of secrecy becomes clearer when we look at the people behind it. The co-founder and president of MEMRI and the registered owner of the website is an Israeli called Yigal Karman, or it says Mr., or rather Colonel Karman, spent 22 years in Israeli military intelligence and later served as a counterterrorism advisor to 2 different Israeli prime ministers. Retrieving another now deleted page from the archives of the website also throws up a list of its staff. Now ask yourself why they would delete that. Of the 6 people named as the staff before they deleted the page, 3, including Colonel Karman, were described as having worked for Israeli intelligence. Now, you know this story. This is the same point of The Prince and the Spy that Whitney wrote for TLAV, the conversation of how Israel publicly, if you actually look to what they discussed, use intelligence to start companies that work for Israeli intelligence, using former intelligence when they still work for, they're not former if they're still working through that company as intelligence. And I'll grab that story if you want to read it. It's important. The link in the article is there we go, is about Israeli IDF members openly telling you that. This story, The Prince and the Spy, is about Eric Prince being used as sort of the foot in the door American to allow the United States to ignore the fact that it's an Israeli intelligence company working through him, and in regard to many other things. It's not even in regard to Academy. This is about Comframe is one of the points to discuss, but it was about a few different things. Here is the actual quote. It says, the stunning revelation that many Israeli companies, including Black Cube, have been founded as fronts for intelligence operations since 2012. It states that since 2012, cyber-related and intelligence projects that were previously carried out in-house in the Israeli military and Israel's main intelligence arms are transferred to companies that in some cases were built for that exact purpose. It goes on to say, in some cases, managers of development projects in the Israeli military and intelligence arms were encouraged to form their own companies, which then took over the military and/or intelligence project. That the article is right here. I think it was. I'll include that too. Yeah, C-Tech. I just think these things are profoundly important, especially as we're talking about the infiltration and how this is working. But continuing, so the person who founded it, Israeli intelligence. The team behind it, Israeli intelligence, and it says, Colonel Karman's co-founder at the website is Merav Wormser, who is also director of the Center for Middle East Policy at the Indianapolis-based Hudson Institute, which bills itself as America's premier source of applied research on enduring policy changes. The ubiquitous Richard Pearl, which you guys will know, chairman of the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board, recently joined Hudson's Board of Trustees. So you see this incestuous background relationship that ends up coming through the U.S. government. And it says, Miss Wormser is the author of an academic paper entitled, Can Israel Survive Post-Zionism? We're finding out today, in which she argues that left-wing Israeli intellectuals pose, get this, quote, more than a passing threat to the state of Israel, undermining its soul and reducing its will for self-defense. See, this is my point today. They're very quiet about this conversation now, but they were flirting openly with the idea that Israeli Jews who didn't believe in Zionism were a threat to Israel. Which is exactly the point we're making today, is that it's about Zionism. And a Jewish person who doesn't blindly believe in the apartheid supremacist Zionist mindset is a threat to their control, because that's what they use to control the Jewish religion and people around the world. It's insane that it's so publicly written. The article is just simply highlighting very clearly for you that this is a platform that's used to disseminate Israeli propaganda, founded by Israeli propagandists and intelligence and run by Israeli intelligence. It is transparent. Oh, and this is from sourcewatch.org, Middle East. This is SourceWatch. Looks like kind of a Wikipedia like setup, but it says MEMRI is an Israeli propaganda organization that selectively translates materials from Arab, Muslim, Iranian press, purportedly demonstrating hostility and against Israel and Jews. And it's just straight up propaganda. Oh, and you might not be surprised to find out that, guess what? They were also showing you, all the videos that are coming out like this almost always come through this platform. And this is Mohammed Solomon, right? The one that was throwing the cocktail, the Molotov cocktails right on the kind of the tails of the two people that were shot in regard to the embassy. Every one of these stories, guys, and it's not because people are trying to make the case, have obvious concerns that overlap with Israeli propaganda, intelligence, lies. And I just think it's always important with all that we have to know how often it is that these things are manufactured by Israel. And I'm not saying that we can prove that in every case, but it's undeniable that that's happened many times. The ADL has been called out for faking Nazi marches in the past. One in Skokie, Illinois, in Chicago. We talked about this many times. On the record, called out by The Guardian in the past. So think about this when you get two-party illusionists out there, rather, people stuck in it, who are using these channels to propagate the idea that these people want to kill you and, steal your freedoms or hate you because of your freedoms. Like, there's nothing new in all of this, guys. And of course, what we get from all of them, ban all the third world immigration, legal or illegal. There should be a moratorium on all illegal immigration. Yeah, Charlie Kirk, Matt Walsh, Jack Posobiec. This is just a few of them, but people are sharing this around. It's the kind of thing you get, and it's the same sentiment and nearly the exact same wording. That's not by accident, guys. There's somebody who is seeding these things through them, and maybe they don't even know that. That's the point. I keep saying this. I think most of them out there, whether willful ignorance or not, may not even be aware that they're being used. But that's not that I'm saying for sure. You can consider that for yourself. But it's time to ban third world. Now, if as a country that's the decision, then there's no requirement in that regard. And I'm even the one that would argue that until we can, get a handle on what the hell is actually happening, maybe that is important. But just recognizing the narrative and how it's seeded through the certain kind of conversations and using basically that they're all a threat to your family and the same kind of stuff, the same idea, even though the vast majority using statistics, everything we have shows you that's just simply not true. It's not. But see, facts don't matter when it's an emotional partisan argument. Now, let's talk about two very important stories around just this large conversation before we get into the development of the Alien Enemies Act. We'll talk about what I think is an obvious orchestrated manipulation taking place in LA, which there's plenty of events I don't think are orchestrated, for those that may always think that that's just how we go. It's not the case. The facts matter to me. We're going to talk about some overlaps around this in LA and finish with Garcia, which is important to this. But this will probably, I shouldn't say it's going to blow your mind. We already floated this was the most likely, and this is what we expected. It's almost hard to see that in a world that this wouldn't happen with what's going on. A man has pretended to be an ICE agent, went into a business, tied up the woman working there, and stole $1,000 from them. This is what people have feared. Is anybody surprised? This is being reported from a local channel. The bottom line is that if you recognize that there's no warrants being presented, they're now even stressing that doesn't matter. Go out there and go to Home Depots and 7-Elevens and just start grabbing people. That's Miller saying that. But yet simultaneously telling you we're going after the worst of the worst, because that's just that's the reciting of the narrative. But if we know there's no warrants, we saw that in the beginning with Khalil, with Ozturk, masking themselves up, having none. Realize before this ever kicked off for real, they were wearing masks already. So this argument that somehow it's because evil Democrats trying to attack them. Well, right when they started, they were already doing that. So this is just a coordinated effort using the two-party illusion like everything we're talking about. But because they're not identifying themselves, because they're not showing a warrant, he has an ICE jacket, which you can buy on Amazon for 30 cents or whatever. It's ridiculous. And goes in there and who knows what else could have happened? Who knows what else did happen? Who knows how many other places this is happening? It's a foregone. You have to recognize how obviously this is going to happen, because they are, understand it, guys, whether you agree with it or not, breaking the law, unconstitutional everywhere they act. By their own admission, whether or not you agree with it, being an honest person, being objective, you can acknowledge that what they're doing, by definition, textbook examples of unconstitutional acts. Now, again, but I agree with it, and I think it should happen anyway. I can even respect that. Like, now I shouldn't say that because I think it's crazy that you wouldn't. But I mean, look, we all have our own opinions. Maybe you don't care about the Constitution. My point is that you don't have to believe just what I believe. As long as you're being honest about your opinion, give me your argument. Tell me why you think this should be happening and why it's okay that's breaking the But see, the difference is you get these partisans today that are just either unaware that it's unconstitutional, which is terrifying, or just don't care. And the ones that don't care, I think it's half and half that are pretending it's constitutional, or the ones that are just, it's an unlikely argument, I think, to come out and say, I don't care about the Constitution, from people arguing that this is all about protecting the Constitution. But it's everywhere you look. This is going to get worse because they are not doing what the law requires while claiming to enforce the law. Here's another example. This was an older one, but I just haven't got a chance to point it out. June 4th. It turns out you've heard about this. This was pretty broadly reported. A birthday party that they raided, right? Turns out the so-called Tren de Aragua gathering was the birthday party they claimed the Trump administration apparently broke up in March was a birthday party. And you realize this is flushed out now. The evidence has come out. It says none of the people that were arrested at the party seem to have any criminal record whatsoever. And none have been charged criminally in the months after this. So there's no way to spin that. They raided a birthday party based on erroneous information and didn't take anybody, didn't arrest anybody, didn't charge with a crime. The point is that this is how flimsy this all is. And imagine what if they had taken somebody like they did right in the beginning? Because they said, take him anyway, because he looks that way, like they did with a teen who's currently in El Salvador. They would already be there. An honest person would be able to acknowledge how obvious this is. Now, the Alien Enemies Act, Law and Crime reported this, hereby declared unlawful. This is probably the easiest thing to prove in this whole conversation. You can read the act for yourself, and unless you're just a dishonest person, you can acknowledge that at best, even if you, like, let's just even say you agree with the really abstract, flimsy I don't know how you can even prove this, but that, this is an invasion because of illegal immigration that Biden orchestrated. Look, let's just say that's the case. That, even if proven, would still not apply to the Alien Enemies Act. And that's the whole point here, is that even if everything they're saying is true, it's still an illegal use of this act. That's what's so frustrating about people trying to go back and forth about this, arguing that we're somehow missing the point. No, it's that you're locked in on an argument that you think applies to this, and you have likely not even actually read the language of the act. It says, judge finds severe deficiencies in Trump admin's use of Alien Enemies Act, permanently blocking future deportations. Doesn't mean they're going to care. As I said, Bruce Fine on Fine Points on BitChute that I joined with them has discussed this many times over. And he's an expert in the topic. Oh, look, I lost. Oh, no, that's right. I didn't need to highlight it because I'm going to pretty much go through most of it. So this is from today. Here's what it says. A federal judge in Texas, which I think is relevant. Now, I believe the judge was appointed by Clinton in the 90s. Nonetheless, it's in a Texas courtroom. I think they've been really trying to gravitate towards certain locations because they think it's going to benefit them. So just, realize that there's been many Trump appointed judges that have pushed back, including in the Supreme Court. And many times the Supreme Court has ruled against them when 4 of them, I think, or was it 4 or 5? I think it's 4 of them are Trump, or is it 6? It's slipped my mind all of a sudden, but many of them are Trump appointed judges, or rather conservative, excuse me. And 3 of them, I think, are Trump appointed. And just continuing to show you this narrative of radical judges and activist judges and judicial coup. These are just emotional arguments from Zionist Stephen Miller and others to get you ignoring the facts. It's very simple. Now, a Texas judge has blocked the Trump administration from summarily deporting migrants in the state under a rarely used 18th century wartime power with little or no due process, becoming the latest in a growing line of jurists to hold President Donald Trump's invocation of the act was unlawful. Now, just because this happens, they could just go to another state. You understand? That's why he has to go to the Supreme Court, which they still don't seem to care about. Or I shouldn't take, it seems like they do understand it to a limit because they clearly they're still playing the game with Garcia, which we'll touch on again at the end, acting like, we're doing this not because of the Supreme Court, but they are. And they know they're trying to work. They're trying to do it and somehow comply to put it away by still pretending like they're not complying. It's very childish. But it says U.S. District Judge David, I think it's Bryans, on Monday, granted a request for the permanent injunction barring the government from removing Venezuelan migrants accused of being members of Tren de Aragua. Now realize that even the people they claimed were, the vast majority of them have now been, let me put it this way. I don't want to say the word proven only because I mean, I think proven is accurate. I'm hesitating only because I want to be very clear, specific about the words and how it's used in regard to this topic. Because at the end of the day, like with Garcia, the only real point is that, and from my perspective, is that they were not given their constitutional rights. They were not. There's no due process here. They didn't have a chance to argue that you were wrong, or that maybe you were an American and got caught in the wrong room without your ID. You know, it's how simple that could be. We've already seen that. My point, though, is that through this process, since it happened, their lawyers, their families, and in some cases, people that have been moved around, they've got a chance to now to prove that that's not the case. Even the New York Times broke down what they could find, and over 70% of them were no criminal record. Now, I pointed out that the vast majority of those were here legally. And that's whether they had a visa, a green card, mostly visa, or were in the process of seeking citizenship or in the process of going through asylum, all of which gives them the legal right to be here while that's happening. So it's just so gross and dishonest how this is being abused. And I think mostly people supporting this are either they don't know that, or because they're invested in the gross discussion. They want those things. And somewhere they know, like the fact that they pretend it's not what it looks like shows you that they somewhere know, at the least, that you know that it's wrong. You know, it's the same kind of thing. I see these overlaps in a lot of different places in the conversation of the world. Now, the judge on Monday granted a request for permanent injunction. And it says, for the accused of it being sent to CCOT, was the last part of that paragraph, in El Salvador. In a 56-page order, Bryans wrote that Trump's proclamation was, quote, hereby declared unlawful, reasoning that the administration's implementation of the executive order was inconsistent with the AEA and its statutory requirements, Alien Enemies Act. And listen to this, guys. And please, if you disagree with this, look at the act and you tell me how there's any error in this conversation. Under the AEA, the act, the Alien Enemies Act, Alien Enemies Act, a president cannot unilaterally, this is their quote anyway, define what constitutes an invasion, summarily declare that a foreign nation or government has threatened or perpetuated an invasion or predatory incursion of the United States, identify alien enemies subject to detention or removal, and summarily remove them, the judge wrote. Now, Trump on March 15th became the first president since World War II to invoke the act, which authorizes him to summarily remove, quote, native citizens, denizens, or subjects of, quote, a hostile nation or government. First point. When there is a, quote, declared war. Second point. Against it, or when it has perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States. And, quote, an invasion or predatory incursion. Third point. In a constitutional in a controversial and novel use of the power, Trump declared Tren de Aragua had committed or attempted an invasion or predatory incursion, such that any member of the group was summarily removable under the act. Now, the administration asserted that the gang constituted, quote, and this is an important deviation, a hybrid criminal state for purposes of invoking the act. They realized in the beginning that's not what they said. They said this is an invasion. That's a force invading our country. And again, the absurdly obvious point of claiming that Biden allowed them in through kind of scattered immigration over 4 years, but then somehow it was Venezuela in a coordinated effort invading this country. You can't have both those make sense at the same time. Even if you want to argue they worked with Biden, it's not a one group thing. Now, you can argue that they were surreptitiously sending them in for some kind of background effort. Yeah, that's certainly possible. That would still not apply to this act. That's the point. It's very clear. Now it says the court, and so again, the point was when they rolled it back to a hybrid criminal state, that means they're acknowledging that that the reality of the circumstances are not met for this act. And so they tried to water it back and say, well, it's a hybrid criminal state. So that's why it applies. That was their kind of pushback. The court rejected the administration's interpretation of the act and emphasized that proper invocation of the power, important, requires an executive order. I hate that she said that, by the way. I don't think executive order should be even in the conversation, but the point is legislation or an order or something like that. But in this case, that's what he wrote, executive order. An order that includes sufficient factual statements and other references enabling courts to determine whether the conduct and events satisfy the conditions that support the invocation of the statute, which they didn't do. They just state that, that this is the kind of thing we've seen through this administration so far, like forceful, righteous indignation. Unjust. It says, quote, this court need not look beyond the four corners, of the president's proclamation. So his statements itself. The court need not look beyond even what he wrote to find its severe deficiencies in comporting with the AEA. even accepting every assertion in the proclamation of what Trump wrote as true, it does not rise to meet the plain, ordinary meanings of the statutory terms. That, again, if you're an honest, objective person, that you can't deny. You could try to contort them into making sense, but again, then you're leaning into a partisan side. Nonpartisan objective, this is simply obvious. And it says, following a brief overview on interpreting the language of the centuries-old statute, Bryans explain that the terms invasion and predatory incursion, as used in the statute, require a militarized effort against and militarized intrusion into a territory of the United States with the specific purpose of conquering or obtaining control over territory. Clearly, you can't make that case in any for all of them, really, right? So if we're talking about the invasion, I think is an obvious point to point out where's the invasion taking place, like not the abstract behind it. Like the point is, if you want to make it the abstract over the time, well, then the point is you can't verify that. That's the abstract opinion. The facts don't make that clear, right? Because there's just people there. You can't prove that they're all working together for that outcome. That you can claim that, you can't prove it. In this case, the point is, continuing, that a militarized effort. So I don't see that. They will make arguments for why they try to make that case, but that's not there. And intrusion into the United States with the specific purpose of conquering or obtaining control. Now, again, you could broadly argue it the whole country they're going for, but you can't prove that that's the intent right now. And it says, the alleged actions of the Tren de Aragua, according to the judge, were well outside the definitions of those terms. If they even are Tren de Aragua, they keep getting caught for accusing people of that aren't. And it says this court also rejected the administration's request to broaden the meaning of these terms. So they know they're losing this, and they're just trying to how about we just stretch this out to meet what we want? So in some cases, judges might go along with it because they're on their side, I guess. That's where politics do play a factor in appointing these judges, which that's my point. They're all politically motivated in some way. It doesn't change the reality of the facts. They requested to broaden the meaning of the terms in light of modern warfare tactics. No, it's not an unfair argument, right? Asymmetrical warfare. The U.S. knows that better than anybody. But it says, with Bryan's writing that doing so would effectively render the AEA irrelevant. So that same point, right? If you could argue that is the case, that it's a modern warfare dynamic, but even making that case, that invalidates that act would be the appropriate one to use. It's very simple. The AEA was clearly, this is what she wrote, was clearly not, or excuse me, is it a guy? It was, David, excuse me. David is the judge. It says, the AEA was clearly not meant to be all-encompassing. As such, this court declines to stretch the meaning of the word so broadly that mass migration or criminal activities by some members of a particular nationality could qualify as an invasion, and virtually any group hailing from virtually any country could be deemed alien enemies. That's the whole point, you understand? That's why they did it that way. So it would apply wherever they wanted it to. It's very clear to me. Bryan's analysis cited heavily to the order of another federal judge in Texas. Trump appointed U.S. District Judge Fernando Rodriguez, who in April similarly found that the administration's use was illegal of this act. So you got a Trump-appointed judge in Texas saying it's illegal. You got a Clinton-appointed judge saying it's illegal. Kind of hard not to see how clear this is. Quote, the court properly recognized that the Alien Enemies Act is a wartime measure that cannot be used during peacetime, much less without due process. That's my point. To send people to a gulag-type prison in El Salvador. That's according to the Deputy Director of ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project. So I personally find it to be very relevant. But of course, the problem is that anything going against their agenda is now you're on the other side. It's othering everybody. You're the other. You're dehumanized. You don't matter if you don't agree with us. Seems very common for partisan politics. Now, here's the actual court document. You can read through this for yourself if you want to check it out. I'll always include these for you if I can. That's how we roll on this platform. Now let's talk about the orchestrated event. I really want to stress that the evidence is pretty damn obvious. As I want to also stress, it always seems to be that there's political entities involved with trying to either take advantage of this, drive the chaos for something else, which kind of the same point. I mean, in some cases, I think, like, for example, there'll be an event that's getting a lot of attention and groups will try to work their way in to get some kind of recognition, or maybe able to write down later that they were there and we did that. Or, there's a lot of moving parts to how corporations, military, intelligence will find ways to influence, take control, or simply use these events. It's just simply always how this goes. And I mean, you can look back through events and you'll find it. Look at January 6th, for example. It's obvious to see there's just scattered throughout the whole thing. Now, I simply put this out on the 9th. This picture, it's just, for me, it's not proof, things like this. But when I see things like this, and, if this was during Biden's administration, all conservatives would already be telling you this was false. It feels hard not to see how easily this is. Why is there this one guy who's in all the pictures waving a Mexican flag, masked up? Well, why is if you look at these pictures, half the time he's literally surrounded by media and there's not even anybody else really there with him. Doesn't that feel strange to you? It really should. Even if it's organic, there's something there. It feels like he's being used, right? Now, the main point, or even if it is all organic, why does it make sense to focus on people who are committing crimes, people who are vandalizing, people who are there? Let's just say they're illegal immigrants. They're fighting to take over the country. Okay, let's just give you that. That's what those people are doing. Why does then that invalidate everybody else there? So what there are there people there protesting because at least they think ICE is breaking the law? Yes, and you damn well know that. So if you don't respect their right to protest because this person over here did something violent, then you're the same thing. You are just like the left who was doing the same thing to you. I know you're not going to admit that, but that's the reality. And I'm hoping to reach honest, intelligent, objective people who can acknowledge and call that out because it's damn near everywhere right now. So I simply said, you're being played. Manufacturing consent. Elon Musk is the one that shared this. And a weird side point, by the way, isn't it interesting how suddenly this event starts and they're not like high-fiving each other all of a sudden, but him and Trump are they're sharing each other's content. They're not fighting anymore. Now, I'm not even trying to insinuate. I don't know. I'm not, you could name off possibilities. It could be that's, them trying to use this to hide that they were fighting. Who knows? But I just think it's very telling that suddenly everyone's like, okay, we're good again. Ignore that he just said Trump's on the Epstein list. Let's just move beyond that and start. That's partisanship for you guys. Now, this person says they are not violating the Constitution. Grow a set of balls, he says, which is just an interesting statement, isn't it? Like, okay, let's just so the insinuation is somehow, and this is my point about partisanship. Not that I have a different opinion, right? Not that I simply do think it's a violation of the Constitution, but that somehow I'm afraid to say the truth, right? That I'm just lying because I don't want to admit how the hell would you know that? It's the kind of assumptive, naive, partisan game that gets played every day on this platform. And he says, Marines are sworn to protect America from enemies, foreign and domestic, and we don't take our vows lightly. Right. So because he's a Marine and because he swore an oath, he knows better than everybody. Well, it is a violation, bud, and it's very clear. You can read the Posse Comitatus Act. You can look at the entire thing going on. The point is that the problem is that people take partisan narratives or the argument of what they claim is happening and somehow try to make it make sense. For those that are objective and nonpartisan, I would call it out if it was Biden, and I would call it out if it was Trump. I'm willing to bet you if this was happening under Biden, you'd be singing a different tune, but I can't know that for sure. And it says the military does serve a purpose. Stop being a fearful propagandist coward. Right. Because I'm just afraid to say the truth like he is. What a shining beacon of truth. And I simply said, so you either don't understand or don't care about the Constitution. It's really that simple. Stop being a blind, naive follower. And I posted with the Roosevelt quote, to announce that there must be no criticism of the president or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but it's morally treasonable to the American people. And I also want to point out, by the way, that there's a lot of pretty prominent Republicans who are also pointing this out. So this person, if you're saying that, are you calling them cowards? Are you saying that they don't understand? Other Marines, by the way, someone or someone I hold in much higher regard, somebody like, I'm just all of a sudden blanking. Oh, that's so crazy. I don't know why my name just slipped me. I greatly respect him. Had him here for many interviews. The 101st Airborne, refused to take the shot. God darn it, that frustrates me. The point is that he is a very, prominent military person who was left because he has principles in regard to the COVID shot or forced out, and he's calling this a complete manipulation. God, that drives me crazy. I'll remember it. Somebody in the chat will say it, but I think there was a response, and the point was simply, saying I swore an oath to defend the Constitution. Did you? Grow a spine. Same thing. And I just said, so it's that you don't understand it then. Well, that's embarrassing. Here. Oh, it's right there. I mean, Brad Miller. I hate that I did that because I have immense respect for this man. The two images below, he says, don't represent different sides. Stop assuming engineered problems and reactions leading to predetermined solutions. Present two different sides of a solution. These crafted dialectical traps are used over and over and over again because people keep falling for them. And this person says, choose a side. And it's somehow Trump in that orchestrated event, and then this guy with a flag in an orchestrated event. It's just interesting. Now, Jason Bassler points this out and says, identity politics equals brain rot, statism, not even once. Now it says, well, basically one side says, we hated January 6th, but love riots. That's the left side. And over here it says, we hate the CDC, but we love ICE. And he just says, LOL, you're both just awful. And just the contradictions are everywhere if you're willing to be honest about how blind this seems. Now, Catherine Austin Fitts pointed this out, and this is very important, guys. This is one of many things you'll probably find. I'll go over just a couple that I noticed. And she just says, surprise, surprise, it's an op. Laura Powell, actually, I think that's just right here. Yeah, here says, if you're a Californian, the current LA riots are an example of your tax dollars hard at work. The Coalition for Human Immigration Right, CHIRLA, is one of the key players in fomenting the violent response to immigration enforcement actions. Now, it's very easy to just go, and maybe it is the case. I'm not saying I know for sure, but it's very easy. Just go, oh, they support the immigration. Oh, that means that's the left, fine. But think about it for a second. Why does it make sense for somebody who's fighting for this to continue to create chaos that's used to make them look like they shouldn't be here? Doesn't that seem a little bit backward? Now, yet what my point is, that's why I started with the MEMRI point, is that we have there are groups that exist within the paradigm, or even groups like that, the fake news channel that are run by Israeli intelligence, that are simply here to parrot and promote the things that keep us divided, the things that keep you propagandized in just the right ways. So very much consider whether this is a left-leaning thing and they just wanted to do this for, I guess, whatever narrative you think somehow makes that make sense. But also consider that this could be one of many partisan groups meant to create the chaos that the government uses to justify where it's going. Now, I know far too many out there who do understand how that works, choose to overlook this. There's somebody who I just said that to recently about that. I said, I've talked to them in the past, and I know these things. We discussed the two-party illusion, and yet every day I see them tap into the two-party illusion. Every day using partisan narratives to, why the left? It saddens me because I know they're smart to see through it, and that tells me they're choosing to stay tapped into it for whatever reason. It's upsetting, because that keeps their audiences tapped into it. Now it says, it's an LA-based nonprofit with a history of taking radical positions on immigration. For example, it led a 2018 campaign to abolish ICE. It currently leads the Los Angeles Rapid Response Network, which gathers intel about enforcement actions and deploys activists respond. Yeah, so is that to fight for immigration, or is that to create the chaos that then is used to stop, to call them all criminals, which is not about immigration even. That's the woke ideology in USAID. It's about the regime change. That's simply the tool being used, in my opinion. And so in this case, ask why, if that was their objective, to fight for immigrants to be in this country, like illegal and unfettered with no restrictions, why would they create chaos? I can't stress that enough. And if you got a valid argument for why you think that makes sense, post in the chat. I'll pay attention. I'll try to see it. I think I'm genuinely curious for how you think that might work. And I'm sure there's somewhere you could, a way you could turn it to make it make sense. And I'm not saying that facetiously, let me know. And it says, CHIRLA has strong ties to the Democratic Party in California and has supported the election of Democrat candidates through its lobbying arm, obviously, partisanship. That to me means this entity has strong ties to the government and has supported partisan candidates. That's what that reads to me. You see the difference? And you see, and again, maybe I'm wrong, but I really just want to stress everybody out there to at least use that, consider it. As you're reading all these things and you're watching the partisan hair on fire people like Alex Jones, maybe it makes sense to you, but stand back and go, okay, at the same time, what is Ryan saying? Now look at both those things, hold it up in the light and ask yourself which one feels like it makes more sense. Which one has more rooted history in everything we're dealing with? If you're honest, it's obvious to me. Or to me, obviously, but if you're honest, I would believe it's obvious to you as well. Now it says they also close relationship with the organized labor in the state, which in turn is a major fan. I mean, you get the general point. It's very immersed with the Democratic Party, with my point, partisanship and the government. I'm trying to make sure there's nothing super there important. I obtained the financial audit that showed that so basically they received $34 million from the state, mostly through the Department of Social Services, accounting for 72% of its total revenue. This is nearly a threefold increase over the previous year. It also received $450,000 in federal contracts, which the mayor publicly took credit for helping secure. Eisenhower warned of the military industrial complex. Now we face a nonprofit industrial complex. It's really the same thing if you understand how it's used. But the bottom line is you can see the funding for many different overlaps to this conversation. Now, she also adds more details and receipts in the thread. Where is it? Right there. And says taxpayer funded nonprofit behind the anti-ICE riots in Los Angeles. And I very much agree with that. I think that's very clear. Here's another example of a clip that somebody showed. Breaking it down. And again, you tell me you don't see these every time. Now, it's also worth considering that these could be fake. I mean, people do this. They post things on Craigslist while things are happening for this very kind of purpose. But I think there is an element to this that is how this works. Where you just kind of put something out. I'll give you $50 a person to go out there and say these things. It happens all the time. This is Shipwreck. It says Craigslist ad for LA riots and no kings, which we'll point out in a second. And everyone seems to be pointing in this, people, coming from the same overlapping groups. It's building to they're just so you know that they're framing this like the Stephen Millers and this upcoming protest as a revolution, a rebellion, an insurrection. And thinking back to the Alien Enemies Act we just discussed, do you not see how important it is for them to actually turn what's happening into what they, an invasion, like to turn this into what they can frame as an actual invasion? Because then everything will line up for them. You can't, even if you don't agree with that, you see the logic in how that works. Now it says, follow the money. It's all a show for destabilizing the administration while simultaneously, possibly, could be used to push Palantir Tech and the big, beautiful bill. Now, when he says destabilizing the administration, it's interesting because if you're arguing the used to push Palantir and the bill, you feel like that's more of like a nonpartisan kind of overlap, but this destabilizing administration to me suggests you think that it's about the left kind of hurting the Trump administration. But all these things can exist simultaneously. There are personal agendas that exist through these people, right? But my major opinion is this is a beyond partisanship is what this is really about.
Do this and then I'm gonna go make strawberry scones. But when we talked about how this thing that was going on in Los Angeles was paid agitators, this is what I meant. I remember back when the Black Lives Matter riots were happening as well, they had very similar Craigslist ads looking for the tough.
And by the way, let's not forget the plenty of examples that overlap on the right. We've gone through these, even overlap with January 6 points. And my point is the same, is that's not that you guys were doing that, but you were being set up for it. It's the same point.
Badasses in the city of Los Angeles seeking extremely tough, brave men for a new crew on building. Compensation is $6,500 to $125,000 per week. Get paid every week, no matter what. Physical strength needed, mental toughness.
Now, consider with other things we've seen that this is, maybe it's intelligence. Maybe it's just some random, rabble rousers out there trying to cause chaos. Maybe it's Israel. All things we should consider, but all of those things do make sense with what's actually going on. They all have an interest in creating what you're seeing. Not for exposing evil Muslims. It's about very clearly rationalizing, justifying, whether it's immigration OS with Palantir, right? The suppression of your rights, the justification for future legislation, the ongoing continual funding of Israel because they're fighting the Muslim threat. It all is the same thing, in my opinion, at least from their perspective.
Ready for confrontation when necessary. However, we train you if necessary. Bravery, reliability, strength, team discipline. They'd like you to have military experience, but if you're a Marine, then they do not want you in their group because it's apparently a long story. Job title is listed as operator, and there's no experience required, and it's contracted work. And they were looking in the greater Los Angeles area. Obviously, they're not going to tell you exactly what it's for. Wait for you to call and then explain it. This is what happened during the Black Lives Matter riots, is they would put out these Craigslist ads, and then all these people would call, and then they would recruit all these people to go be agitators at these events. They would turn what was initially a peaceful protest of just marching into a full-blown riot, and that's the very same thing that's happening here.
Right. So I'm glad that's the objective, bottom line being left, whether left or right, that what she's discussing, and this is the truth, whether you like it or not. Like I said, yes, what was happening, like Black Lives Matter, there were objectively rioting, like it's very clear, breaking windows and burning things, but there were also people that weren't doing that. I mean, there were people that were there protesting because they believed they were fighting for racial, to stop racial, racism. That was part of the conversation. And whether they were misguided or not, you can't just continue to protect. But that's the same thing every time. And it's so frustrating that people can't continue, be honest about how that works. And so what she's simply telling you is they did that then, and it was not that they were all just rioting because that's what left does, but because they were people that were designed to make that be the case. So the right could turn around and say, see, they're all a bunch of rioting maniacs, and we can't, it's the same thing back and forth. And really, the American people are the ones caught in the middle of all this. You got a bunch of grifters and mainstream alternative media and paid agitators and Israeli spies. They're all fighting each other and acting like they're the Congress fights back and forth. And most Americans are like, what the F is going on? Like, that's what I believe anyway, that there's a lot of people that are just disconcerted by all of this. And we're living through this fake AstroTurf manipulation where they're, showing you this theater, and people are enjoying it in some cases. They think it's funny. They think it's entertaining, but it's real in the sense that it's affecting your life or it will be used against you.
Who can afford that kind of bankroll? Well, nokings.org can. Apparently, this whole thing has been planned for a really long time. They're trying to get more in different days on different states. Specifically, June 14th seems to be a pretty big hot button. They're looking at Phoenix, Atlanta, and a handful of other major cities. You can go to the map on the website and just...
Now, this is being really pressed by everyone that I can see. Loomer, Jones, everyone. Like, this is the revolution, the communist overtaking of our country. That's what they're all pushing with this. Consider it. But also consider that this is just one more example of how they're trying to create the illusion that this is a rebellion in this country so they can use it for the obvious reasons.
Take a look. Here's some of the organizations that they're working with, and there's a lot of them, but I'm going to go through a couple. There's Bend the Arc, which is Jewish Action. Bernie Sanders, which I don't know. Americans United, Blue Anchor, Cast, Demlist, Families Over...
In case you missed it, there was an Israeli influence there.
For Billionaires, Faithful America, Fair Share America, Face the Music, Federal Workers Against Doge, Fun Federal Unionist Network, The Feminist Majority, Bulletproof Pride, Catholics Vote Common Good, Care in Action, Center for Common Ground. I mean, there's tons of them. That's who's paying for it. This has been in the works for a really long time. That should be really nothing new to you. But here's what I will say, okay, with all the paid agitators and all the things going on, there are going to be very real people who believe this is a very real march for justice that are going to be boots on the ground down there thinking that they're doing something. So if you, your family, your friends are thinking about getting together and heading down there and sticking it to the man, don't. Because all of those paid agitators, they have protection, right? They'll get lawyers, they'll get bailed out of jail, but guess who won't? You won't. You will not.
Just like January 6th, right? The Ray Epps and all the rest, all the grifters, manipulators, or, the point is that they had the grandmas walking through those ropes, making their videos, which then they get sent to jail. Right? It is an orchestrated event to create the outcome that they can use to say, you're all evil insurrectionists. It's the same thing in reverse now. I know enough of you are honest out there to call that out and to see how clearly this is being used.
You will be left on your own. Here's to hoping you learned the first time with the BLM stuff. Don't do it. Don't ruin your life. Don't ruin your life over this. Don't ruin your job opportunities over this. Don't do it. This is all staged. It's all orchestrated. It's all political. All right, I gotta go. We'll see you later.
Here's another clip that James Lee shared. Now, this one is, my opinion is it's a bit more partisan, but I just think it's interesting that what she caught with the video. The whole thing, my overarching point continues to be that regardless of the partisan overlap, that is how this works, right? Where they take, right-leaning groups or militias and they use them to create, it's the same kind of thing. And all it's really about is dividing you and fighting, making you fight each other for the larger agenda. So when she's highlighting this, consider that point as it's going through. But I think it's important to overlap it with the where it's coming from, the protest itself. I think it's very clear that this is being stoked. And James says Walmart is funding this, which I think that's a bit of you'll see how it connects. I don't think you can just say that that's the outcome. I think there's more of a leap, a bit of an assumption, but it certainly could be. And even if it was Walmart, I don't think that that's Walmart. I think there's much more going on that's just it's a powerful background entity, and there's somebody using those resources to achieve this, as opposed to just the Walmart brand being upset that Trump said something about tariffs, which is her kind of point. But consider that too.
This is wild. A mysterious black truck just passed out all of these expensive bionic face shields to protesters in LA, and the news caught it on camera. I zoomed in and found out this is the UVEX bionic shield.
You know why that worries me more than anything is because, I've been generally worried about the kind of what intersection of some of these previous agendas, and the worry that there's going to be some kind of an overlap with, like, for example, and I'm not trying to say I have any evidence of this, don't want to scare anybody, but just as the thought to consider it, that let's just say there's a, some MEMRI Palestinian, I think the lie is my point, comes out and decides to throw some kind of a thing that's a biological problem. That then I mean, everything spins into place, whether it's the biological pathogen overlap, whether it's the domestic terrorism overlap, whether it's the foreign policy overlap. I mean, everything, immigration, and they're passing out what appear to be like gas mask kind of things. I mean, I can't tell if it's gas mask or you have to look it up, the bionic shield. I think but it's more of a, it gives the impression of some kind of a militarized, weird, you get what I'm going with it. Like, I wonder whether that's even just the presentation of that worth considering.
These are not cheap. They're around $45 to $65, and you can't just get them in bulk. But one place that sells them is Walmart. And why is that important? Because there's
So you see, I feel, because it sells them and then because Walmart might be upset about something, this is the kind of thing that that's a possibility and nothing more, right? It's a bit of I'll let it finish out because but the point is simply that it's a lot of times there's a very quick jump to make it connect when it really just is, they might be there.
There's a new protest being promoted called No Kings on June 14th. And even celebrities like Chrissy Teigen are posting it. And it's in magazines and newspapers. And guess who's behind this message? Christy Walton. That's right. One of the billionaire heiresses, a part of the Walmart family. Now, I don't know.
Same point, right? You could argue that she did that, but does that prove that that's Walmart doing it? Or really that Walmart had those and so she has access to them? I'm not denying. I mean, very well could be. I just think it's important not to, you can connect the dots if you come at it with a foregone conclusion, the dots will connect themselves for you. And it's not always the reality.
Why they would be behind that protest against President Trump. But remember, just less than 3 weeks ago, President Trump tweeted about the whole tariff situation, saying Walmart should stop trying to blame tariffs as the reason for raising prices throughout the chain. Walmart made billions of dollars of last year, far more than expected. Between Walmart and China, they should, as is said, eat the tariffs and not charge valued customers anything. I'll be watching, and so will your customers.
Aside from the fact that everyone everywhere who was honest and had a brain already knew that's how it was going to go. The idea that you're supposed to, I'm no supporter of Walmart. I hate that place. But the point is to say that it's their fault. Now they're doing something wrong by not doing what every business would do, right? The tariffs are why the prices go up, not the fact that they're adjusting to meet what's net. I don't think any of these corporations are like skating by. Like they're robbing you all the time. My point is from a company's perspective, you knew that was going to happen. And then when they do it, he comes out and criticizes them for doing what everyone is also doing. He didn't criticize the Republican-leaning platforms and companies that did the same thing. I mean, maybe he did. The point is simply that it's obvious where that was going to go. That's just a side point.
So is it possible that maybe the Walmart family didn't like that and now they're finding ways to make their voices heard?
But that's a massive leap to make that conclusion. At best, you could say that she is responsible, behind this. I just think that's usually how that goes, but it's worth considering.
Or is this just a big coincidence? As always, let me know what you think about all of this down below.
Because there's a lot of people that are, playing it fast and loose with things that just make a good argument, but I'm all for considering possibilities. I'm not going to say she said that's the absolute fact. She didn't do that. So that's why I played it. I think there's some important things in there. Just be objective as possible today. People are trying to trick you all over the place. But so the mask itself, which just has a look of something, like gives you a certain perception, it's just very interesting. But so the Walmart overlap and all of this, same point, guys. I think it's obvious that all we're really seeing is massive moneyed interests playing a role in destabilization, division, problem, reaction, solution. I mean, divide and conquer, guys. We all know how this tends to work, And so with where that goes and the No King protest, which I think it's interesting. I'll show you the actual website, is essentially, oops. Oh, that was the end of it. Sorry. Thought I removed it. That it's interesting that as we can see from a nonpartisan perspective, that what the government is doing happened during Biden's administration, but it's clearly on steroids right now with Trump. I think it would have been no matter who's in presidency, that they are rapidly showing you the lawless nature of what they are, doing things that are verifiably against the law. And so when people are making, whether the intention behind the protest was about that or destabilization or left's fighting Donald Trump, there are people within it that protest or want to be there because they see the reality of that happening. You see what I'm saying? And so it's so dishonest to claim that we automatically know it's a weaponized, just left versus the right, just because it says the thing about your chosen idea, your leader, right? Trump can't be called that because we're on his side, but he is breaking the law, just like Biden broke the law. You know what I mean? Like, it's so infuriating that we can't just be adults about this, but it's everywhere. Now, going forward, here it is right here. No kings. In America, it says we don't do kings. They've defied our courts, deported Americans, disappeared people off the streets, attacked our civil rights, and slashed our service. Is that not accurate? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's just interesting. These kind of things I never support because I don't, like you could point out, there's moneyed interests that are using things like this, even if it's just to promote their own name. So I'm just never, even when it comes to protesting in general, it takes a lot. It's very specific for me to want to be involved in any protest, and usually don't, because I feel like it's, especially today, largely fruitless, but I'll never say people shouldn't do it. There's plenty of times when I do see an effect. I just think it's very interesting that this is being pointed out, and it's now being used, as you would expect, by people like Jones to say, are you ready for the communist uprising on June 14th? You see what I'm saying? Like, if you want to try to pretend that this is them trying to, what? So is your argument that this is a protest that is a secretly hiding a revolution? Are you going to tell me that they would publicize the day they were going to revolt? You see how dumb it is when you just apply the smallest amount of logic? Clearly, this could end up being chaotic, and I guarantee it will be, because either left or right, the government makes that the reality, and sometimes the people do it for themselves. But to say that, there are people who are not partisan. There are people who are on the right who agree that something's wrong. People that support Alex are saying that. But that's the way you frame that because you're a cartoon. It's hyperbolic, everything. World War III, communist takeover, instead of acknowledging exactly what's happening in front of us with some nuance. Official Communist Party USA. It's just kind of sad to me. And people fall for this stuff, though. Now, just to show you how interesting it is that Alex Jones is on the same side as John Fetterman, left on the same side as the right. And it says, I unapologetically stand for free speech, free demonstrations, and immigration. But, as you've heard the saying before, everything before the word but is usually meaningless. And he goes, this is not that. So basically, you don't believe in those things if it goes against what you say, or, that if they're, now look, same point as always. If people are committing violence, that does not then invalidate people protesting around the same conversation, in the same area even. Those people commit crimes, they should be arrested. Oh, and look, it's the same guy with the same flag. Funny how that's what they all are highlighting. Or the guy riding around the motorcycle with the same flag. Doesn't it seem a little bit orchestrated, contrived? He says, this is anarchy and true chaos, showing his ignorance yet again, seeing as how the word anarchy does not mean chaos. It simply means no rulers, not no rules. And they know this. That's why the government has no place for the only ideology in the world that has no place for them. My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire. I think it's just very telling to see that it's a government agenda, creating the justification to shut down whatever they want, whenever they want. Interesting statement by Donald Trump. Now, it says a military parade upcoming. My point is about whatever the context. Trump just said, if you protest, you'll be met with heavy force. Welcome to the United States 2025, where you can't even protest if he sells you. So are we going to pretend this is constitutional? Or are we just going to do a little pre-crime protest here and say, well, because Democrats, we know they're going to be violent, so we'll shut them down ahead of time. And all the pretend constitutionalists in the Republican Party will scream about how that makes sense because we know Democrats are terrorists. We just can't be this easy to fool. We can't be this stupid.
Big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protest that wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way,
now the people will try to argue he just meant like the ones before, but he didn't say that, did he? It's this blind support, as Roosevelt told you, which is servile and literally. What was it? Now I'm going to look it up again. So I really do like the wording of that quote. And morally treasonable to the American people. That's what Theodore Roosevelt said. To announce that there must be no criticism of the president or that we must stand by them right or wrong is not only unpatriotic and servile, but morally treasonable to the American people. A lot of people need to hear that right now.
And if there's any protest that wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And
he very clearly I didn't start that over. He repeated that twice in a row.
I haven't even heard about a protest. But, this is people that hate our country.
See? So now if you protest, you hate the country. by default. So now if there's protest, they're going to say, but they hate the country. They're a bunch of jihad racists who want to destroy the country. You mean everybody anywhere? Anybody decided to wake up that day and go, I want to go over the... You know this is wrong, guys. You know it. If you're honest and you believe in the Constitution, then call it out. Now recognize those that do not either don't understand the Constitution or don't care about it, despite what they may say out loud.
They will be met with very heavy force.
3 times he said that. No qualification, no if they're violent, just if you protest, you will be met with force. I can't, the people like Jones will ignore that because there's really no way to make it make sense and still pretend like you support this country. But it's everywhere, guys. Now here is Nick Sorter highlighting violence against an unarmed protester and just going, yeah, more of this. I could watch these videos on loop, he says, literally gushing over violence against protesters. You know why? Because the guy touched the horse. I'll play this for you. You tell me what you think about this, and you tell me if this is a guy hitting the police horse. Now, understand, even if this guy had hit the police horse, the way, if you want to call this a hit, which I'll show you, what they continue to do is not new. I'll show you a video that already happened in the street where these cops, which is why he's acting the way he is, in my opinion, are running people over. And it's not new in the slightest. And you know well as I, if this manipulator, Nick Sorter, was seeing this and it was the Democrat side doing it to a January 6er, he would be screaming about it for weeks, about how they tried to murder him. The typical bombastic, hyperbolic framing of a partisan outlet. Let's watch the clip really quickly. You can see it for yourself. Okay, so what the point is, this guy's surrounded, okay? They surround him. Now, if you already know, like you can see, they're running people over. In fact, let me play that first. So this was widely covered. This guy's laying on the ground. Watch what they do to this guy. And this is really not new, guys. If you paid attention, they've been doing this for years. Derek's been covering this for so long. He runs over the guy more than once. They're hitting him with the stick. The guy's just standing. He's sitting there with his arms in the air. These people are angry and want to take it out on this guy. That's what's going on. And everybody sees this. Look at that. You think that makes sense? You think that's constitutional? And you realize they're not breaking the law by protesting. That's just because they decide to arbitrarily say, you're all one thing, just like they did to people, trucker convoy. So remember, Nick wants you to believe more of this. He could watch it on loop as this guy, knowing what's been going on, pushes the horse. They didn't hit him. He pushed it away from himself. He's trying to back away, and they just start hitting the guy. Right? If you're going to get run over by a horse, I'm pretty sure I'd push away from it too. Okay. Just to be clear, that's the whole video he shared. Okay, let's watch it again. So this guy, as they surround him, is probably worried he's going to get run over by a horse. I would be too. Now, this is my opinion. I can't speak to what he thinks. But right there, that's the only time he says that's hitting a horse. The horse is coming his way and he's trying to push back from it. That, to me, that seems pretty obvious. Let me play it all the way through. Look at that. And he strikes him in the head. I mean, it's just insane. These are people that are openly supporting police violence, openly supporting authoritarianism, openly supporting unconstitutional actions, while screaming they're America first, while screaming that we're pro-Constitution, while screaming that we are fighting off an illegal invasion, even though these are Americans protesting against crimes committed by your government. It just makes me sad. It really does. Because so many people look to people like this, acting like they're somehow informing them. Again, he says, an LAPD officer beat the crap. He's openly acknowledging that out of a rioter. You see, because they know the buzzwords. It's sort of like calling you guys invaders or insurrectionists. You all had a problem with that, right? Because it was wrong. Because you weren't insurrectionists. You weren't invading the cap, but you rightly called it out. But now you're showing, Nick, that you are the same exact thing. That all you were waiting for was the opportunity to do the wrong thing back to them because it's childish. And he says, who was hitting the police horse? Now, even if you think that was meant to hit him, does that justify what's happening? Because you claim, it's just obviously not what was happening there. And he says, more of this. Assaulting officers and their horses should be met with huge force. You just recognize how absurd it is for these people to act like they actually care about people's rights. And then Gunther Eagleman says, this is the way. And Nick says, I could watch these on loop. It just honestly just makes me sad. People like this getting beat up in the streets, they don't care about that. Why? Because the dumb Democrats. I mean, that's my opinion about what they may be thinking at that moment, but look at their work. That's everywhere they do it. Now, Stephen Miller, right, Mr. Zionist, comes out and says, what is the correct term to describe foreign nationals, okay, waving foreign flags, rioting and instructing federal law enforcement, attempting to expel foreign invaders? See my point? So when did it become all foreign nationals? Yes, it's clear that there are people that are there who are brown. Have you checked all their immigration status? This ignorant and racist assumption that everyone there who's not white is some. I mean, aren't there people? I was just watching a video from. Aren't there people from Denmark? In fact, one of them is currently in prison because he had a paperwork miscommunication in 2015. He's a Trump supporter, by the way. He's still in prison, and I think in Louisiana. That's how it's working today. They don't care about that because it makes the narrative look bad. But what about the people from Russia? What about people from Poland? I mean, well, they're white people who are clear illegally here. We don't focus on that, right? The point is, as Stephen Miller already pointed out, and Trump even made clear, Stephen hates people that don't look like him. Trump said verbatim, if it was up to him, there'd be 100 million people here and they would all look like him. How much more do we need to hear? This guy is a very clear apartheid-loving Zionist, all about racism. He's open about it. And the point is foreign nationals. Again, so brown people, how do you know they're foreign nationals? They had a Mexican flag. Maybe they were born there. Now maybe they have citizenship. You guys are assuming everything because it's easy to do so. And on top of that, the main point I made earlier, how did it go from a bunch of Americans protesting ICE to being foreign nationals, all of it? You see what I'm saying? Like, that's, even if you want to say they're all people that are brown, how do you know they're all foreign? But the point is, these were mostly Americans. And then because they started showing flags, now it became an invasion of Mexico. You realize that was a 30-second difference. You can't just shift into a completely different narrative in the middle of protest and claim that you're all Mexicans invading this country because it meets the narrative you need to make this work. These people are disgusting. I mean, they don't care about you. These people are absolutely trying to hurt you. They're trying to destroy this for them. They don't care about American interests. Now, Aaron Melnick says specifically $800 million. We already talked about this, actually, for retention and signing bonuses, and $8 billion for hiring 10,000 new ICE officers over the next 4 years. So one of the immediate repercussions is rationalizing more police force, more enforcement, more surveillance over your life, because clearly we need to look at what's happening. That's the point. Trump, White House this morning, big, beautiful bill will give ICE agents raises and bonuses and more. They're with the plan that at least is stated, and we'll see if the bill passes, is to turn ICE into the largest agency more than anybody. More funding, more people, over everything, over the FBI, over everything. This is the new Gestapo, guys. I mean, how do you not see how this is being built? Of course, we also know that they've sent thousands of actual troops. Now, we went over the Posse Comitatus Act yesterday. Let me see if I can just bring that up. There it is. Now, this is important. I mean, it's very simple, too. 18 USC 1385. Use of Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Space Force as Posse Comitatus. Now, all it really means is a posse of people that you put together to enforce the law as you see it. And so that's illegal is the point. You can't do that unless it's allowed within the Constitution or it is under a congressional, like the Insurrection Act. So as it says already directly, whoever except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution, that's not what's happening right now, not even they're arguing that, or act of Congress, which is what I argue this will go to, but that's why they're trying to create the argument that it's an insurrection, so they can claim they can use the Insurrection Act. But it says, whoever willfully uses any part of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, or Space Force, so Marines have been deployed, as a Posse Comitatus, or otherwise to execute the laws, shall be fined or imprisoned. That's why they're pretending like, oh no, they're just advising. You would send a Marine to advise. You wouldn't send 700 over 1,000 Marines. You wouldn't send it's just, this is my point. We're being ridiculous by not just being obvious about what that means. They're lying to you. We all know they're lying to you. So if somebody should be literally be waiting for any indication that what they're doing is enforcing the law by simply being there. This is an escalation, and you know it. What they're doing is being aimed at Americans. How is this not concerning for people? I'll include this as well. Now, last couple points I want to go over. Oh, excuse me. 2 more points that we're going to finish with Garcia. This is an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I thought it was interesting to go over a couple points of what's going on in LA. Now, it simply says, masked men burst from a van as 100 or so mostly brown-skinned men and women ran frantically in every direction. This is at the Home Depot in Wilshire Boulevard, downtown Los Angeles. It says, quote, they were just grabbing people. The name they gave was Zoe Chittle, or however you say that. And it says, they don't ask questions. They don't know if any of us were in any kind of immigration process. Now, we don't need to hear or say it. We already know this. Miller and the rest have made that publicly clear. It says, masked, plainclothes officers of the state, cruising America's second largest city in unmarked vans, snatching individuals off the street without warrants and whisking them away to locations unknown or detention centers where members of Congress have been barred unlawfully from entering. Sure sounds like a constitutional America, doesn't it? And realize, regardless of how your perceived intentions that you pretend you know they think from Congress or whatever, congressional members have the legal right to spontaneously go through these detention centers. Look it up. They can literally show up whenever they want and spontaneously do a walkthrough. And they're just refusing that. Now, whether they then get violent with them because they're mad about that, which is also a crime, is a different conversation. The point is, they're refusing to allow them in, which is a crime, and people don't want to acknowledge that. But the overarching point for me is just how lawless this all is. No, these people are literally screaming about the Constitution, America first, and then ignoring the fact these people are the current embodiment of an unlawful, unconstitutional force in this country. No, faceless, nameless, no warrant, no charges provided. In many cases, just being locked away until they figure it out. Ozturk, Khalil, or actually, I think Ozturk was released, but then you have the case of the Danish father. I think it's right here. I don't know, where was that? Oh, I guess I forgot to grab it. Oh, it's right here, I think. There we go. I did mention a few times, so I'll include it today. ICE unjustly imprisons Danish dad of 4. And look it up. He's a MAGA supporter. He was, calling for Trump, calling for Biden to be arrested. I think not that should necessarily be relevant, other than to show people on the right that this is what's happening. I mean, and he was literally showed up for his final meeting to get citizenship, not a green card, citizenship. And they arrested him based on a 2015 paperwork miscommunication. He's been in prison ever since. They went through a hearing and they ruled he had to stay in prison until they figured it out. He didn't break any laws. I mean, it's so wild. And understand that that's a previous, both Trump's and Biden's administrations that have looked at this documents and let him continue. And now suddenly is this the most dangerous people in the country? We're being lied to, guys. And you know it. Somewhere in you know it. Masked, plainclothes officers, not giving warrants. Now it says the aggressive Southern California raids led by ICE, which not coincidentally came just days after Donald Trump's right-hand man, Stephen Miller, barked at ICE leaders, and he did. The link's right in here. Yeah, I've posted it myself. He barked at ICE leaders to hit an arbitrary quota of 1 million arrests this year, yelling, "Why aren't you at Home Depot?" Think about that. Was the flashpoint for tumultuous, weak life, few others? Was the flashpoint for, finishing the sentence. Basically just saying, it's a crazy moment for this country. And the bottom line is, I think he said 7-Eleven and Home Depot. How are you going to pretend that that's the same as saying go after the worst in this country, other than just those who are in front of us and are easiest to grab, which means by definition, not the most dangerous. And it says, meanwhile, in Washington, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that the regime would finally comply with court orders and bring home the wrongly deported Garcia, but only because the Justice Department threw its massive resources into a nationwide witch hunt that resulted in Abrego Garcia's indictment. If the provocative ICE raids and the charges against the Salvadorian refugee were meant to change the national conversation away from the ugly dogfight between Trump and his former seeming co-president and biggest donor, the world's richest person, Elon Musk, the ploy worked. I included that only because whatever it is, clearly it did have an effect of really redefining the current conversation. Now it says, even though the confrontations were largely confined to a handful of blocks in the nation's most sprawling metropolis, the black smoke from the skeleton frames of burned out EVs, the stray Mexican or Palestinian flags emerging from the thick pea soup of tear gas, and the urban warfare pop of flashbang grenades proved catnip to two TV news producers. Yeah, it's a good way to frame that, seeing as how these are very kind of buzz things that are happening as, in many ways, the anomaly of the whole situation. If you stand back as usual and look at everything else, this is the standout that was fixated on, and for obvious reasons. Now, it says the story of what's really happening in Los Angeles is the story of Trump's American authoritarianism. Now, to be clear, it's no different than left or right. Biden was the same building block in exactly where we are now. So make sure you understand that. It says it starts with a big lie, the fallacy that mass deportation would only target murderers, rapers, and other hardened criminals, which are that's verifiably false. The majority of them have not been. That hides the true purpose. And again, remember, the majority of them were here legally. Specifically in regard to the earlier block of those to El Salvador, and largely those followed as well. But that's the main point I'm making. And here, let me include that actually. I did a specific show on just that point, and it's entitled "Trump Deportations Revealed to be Full of Innocent People," very clearly stating again, legal immigrants with no criminal record, despite the argument always being, but they were here illegally. It's like, you didn't listen. That's not the case. Continuing. Yeah, it says the fallacy, the mass deportations only target the worst. That hides the true purpose of bending some laws and totally ignoring others for the sole purpose of amassing more power for the regime. Now, you could disagree with the why, but I think that's part of it. Now, it says there is a common thread to the thuggish intensity of the expanding ICE raids. The White House's over-the-top response to federalizing California National Guard troops, and now even sending in Marines, and its aggressive investigation of the Brego Garcia. It's important to highlight, regardless of, and this is how this is always played, because Newsom is like the number one bad Democrat in minds of most people. You don't care that it's a violation. You don't care that there's an issue with states' rights. It's just interesting to think about. Now, if Newsom was doing something you could prove was in the real time a crime, then you could make an argument for why there's an authority point where they could step over and enforce the law. But to argue that he's simply just not doing, like the argument of deploying National Guard, that's a states' right issue, guys. That's the governor. But nope, because they just want to do what they want. Now, Gavin is just as much a criminal as the rest of them. So it's not about one versus the other. You see, that's what they want you to fall into. It's about giving you the tools, or rather the ammunition, to go after each other, left versus right, so they can all, probably Trump and Gavin Newsom together, roll out this agenda. Now, I'm not saying I think that's the case. I'm just trying to make a point. I think half the time they don't even know they're on the same side, but the reality is what's actually rolling out. It says it is the common thread. It is this: the so-called government exists only for the purpose of attacking its many enemies, real or perceived, or rewarding its small circle of friends, and then it invents lies about make-believe insurrections and a fictional rule of law to justify its crude retributions. Now, I'm willing to bet you the person writing this is not making that point about January 6th, but I am. I completely agree with that. Then it lies about make-believe insurrections. And guess what? Just like they lied about January 6th, now you've got people like the Benny Johnsons and Nick Sorters and Marjorie Taylor Greenes calling the smallest sit-in an insurrection. Because, and not like a joke, not trying to make a case because you see they did it to us, but openly trying to make the case because, well, now you see why. Now you see why, both because of the Alien Enemies Act and whatever else they need to make the case that this is an actual rebellion, an actual insurrection, so they can then do what they're trying to accomplish, at least without less restriction. It says, in recent weeks, the number of undocumented immigrants arrested by ICE and other federal authorities has roughly doubled. Think about that. After he goes, go to 7-Elevens at Home Depot. In fact, I think it says that in here. But the number with no previous criminal record, not even a traffic violation, has also risen to more than 40%. So that's all said and done. Remember, the beginning part about the over 300 or almost 300, that's where you had over 70% of them that were here legally with no criminal record. But based on what they're reporting, which I can't necessarily say I can actually prove in the moment, because I don't, their investigation claims is the way to frame it. But that 40% of all of it so far has been not even a traffic ticket. And I agree with that. I think the evidence has clearly shown that they are grabbing just about whoever they can. And it says, as agents scramble to meet Trump's and Miller's arbitrary rantings about arresting more than 3,000 people a day. Now it says, surely Trump and Miller knew that Los Angeles isn't only the home to more undocumented essential workers, and that's how he frames it anyway, than any other U.S. city that the American citizens would also likely erupt in outrage. Now, the point to make there is the same reason Donald Trump, which is interesting, is you call them essential undocumented workers and you get the people in the Republican Party would, that's so, well, guess what? Donald Trump already made that case. He already told you that there are people in the restaurants and golf courses and different, farmers, that if they write a letter, we'll make that. Oh, so you're making an exception for the people that and we're talking about illegal immigrants that they know are illegal, that they're going, well, it's okay, they can stay. So then Trump made the same point then, right? So there are some essential to them. I just think it's important to think about that for those that want to make the case when a Democrat says it, but don't want to see it in the same thing when Trump does it. My point is, if they're here illegally, that should be a crime, period. Deport them. But through the process, prove that's the case, present your evidence, remove them, which can be a blip, a momentary, it doesn't have to be some trial and hearing and the idea that there's even, jury. It's just people have made this into something so cartoonish. All it requires is the simple acknowledgement of the evidence presented to some kind of authority that shows here is the evidence we have. He is an illegal alien. This is the case. Otherwise, as we've already shown, people are getting grabbed who are saying, I'm an American citizen, and they arrest him anyway. And had they not been forced to give due process, they might already be in El Salvador. And that's not even my opinion. That's logic. It's obviously already happened to more than one person, including American citizens. Now it says, the president's decision to cite a so-called rebellion to federalize the National Guard in the Golden State against the wishes of Gavin Newsom, a power play that hasn't been pulled since 1965, back when the federal government actually opposed racial segregation, they write, lacks any thread of legal justification. If the National Guard called up with hundreds of soldiers forced to sleep on concrete floors and so far having little to do while they're awake, which is important to think about, was an overreach. The point they're making is that it was more about a show of force than not that they needed it. It says Monday's news that the White House has summoned more, I think it's now over 700 Marines, was beyond ridiculous, they write. The move defies both history and legality. I agree. Since the military can't be deployed on U.S. soil without invoking the 1807 Insurrection Act, which has not been done. You can just try to pretend like they're not enforcing the law that's embarrassing. It's like claiming you can't bring back Garcia. We all knew you were lying. You knew that we knew you were lying. It's all this tap dance we do. We pretend like we don't know. But it says, but nothing has truly defined the utter lawlessness of the 47th president and his minions, he writes, more than its handling of Abrego Garcia's case. After judges, including the Supreme Court with its 3 Trump appointees, important to think about, ordered the White House to facilitate the return of the man a federal prosecutor conceded was wrongly deported to a notorious gulag in El Salvador and then was fired. Rather than comply with the rule of law, Bondi's Justice Department worked frantically to backfill a case against Garcia, stretching to prove he is a gang member and a human trafficker after he was stopped in 2022 with a carload of fellow immigrants. Now, I argue the same. What was going on there seems like something strange. I would argue, based on what we have in the logic, it seems most likely he was simply bringing whether illegal immigrants or people that were simply from Mexico who were visa, but probably illegal immigrants, to work for the person he worked for. Construction. And yeah, that arguably is a crime, and not even arguably. Yeah, those are illegal immigrants and you're moving. That's where they're trying to force this into the human trafficking side of it. But you understand how clearly that is a much less reality of bringing people to go work at his boss's construction site. But, again, if you're going to make an issue about that and claim that's the biggest story, then you should be calling out Trump for allowing the same illegal immigrants to work at the farms and the restaurants that he likes. It's the same point. You can't just pretend they're all criminals because this is the case you want to call out. So if we're going to be equally applying the law, then if they're illegal over there at the farm that Trump likes, then they should also be illegal here. If they're not, they're not. The bottom line is you don't know. And that's why due process is important. And that's why now having him back to go through this is a win for the people calling for that, whether or not he turns out to be a criminal. But they're never going to frame it like that. They're going to pretend that we just wanted the criminals in the country, because that's how the two-party illusion works. They lie. But where was it? Oh, yeah. And so the case is that he was coming with them in that car, but the end of it was released with a citation. So how in the world they worked their way back to make this all up? I mean, I'm willing to bet you anything it's rooted in just a few people who are stating all of these things. And with what we've seen, how can we take this at face value at this point? It says, in the Abrego Garcia case, a Tennessee-based federal prosecutor resigned because, according to ABC News, He came to see the investigation was politically motivated. Now, he resigned. There's another guy that got fired for simply pointing out that what they did was a mistake, and Bondi fired him for that. It says, this is one lawyer for the Salvatorian native saying, quote, they'll stop at nothing at all, even some of the most preposterous charges imaginable, just to avoid admitting that they made a mistake, which is what everyone knows happened in the case. It says the rising tide of protest is showing that a lot more everyday folks can see through the over-the-top lies. I agree with that than either the White House or a complaint pundit class had counted on. I really believe that. And that's the problem with a lot of this for people that want the partisanship to be the point. I think people from all sides are seeing this. Now, a few more things to go over around Garcia, since we did focus on this a lot in the last show, and plenty of others. I'll include the one I think is most important that goes back to the origin of this, and I'll include this, which has all the links right here to every court document that proves exactly everything I'm saying. And the show is called The Unprecedented Gaslighting and Lies Around Abrego Garcia. And this is just the 1 hour part that's focused just on that I broke down on Twitter. So first, this is from a few days ago, the 7th, and it's NBC, the questions raised by the new charges against Garcia. And I wanted to include this to kind of give you a quick little background from things that we covered in the last show. And it says, Kilmar Abrego Garcia's sudden return to the United States on Friday to face federal charges of smuggling migrants across the country was a messaging triumph for the Trump administration, which is what it was about. The news deflected public attention from a series of unanimous court rulings, including a Supreme Court decision that President Donald Trump did not have the power to unilaterally detain and deport individuals to foreign prisons without the review of a judge. That's a different ruling, right? They're not winning in most of these. So over here, one of the articles is saying it's distract from Elon Musk and then breaking up. That's more partisan, in my opinion. And this one's saying it's distract from these court. But you can decide. But clearly, seems to be a pretty common concern or possibility that these things are being done to make you stop looking at something else. Now, whether it's the partisan media saying that or not, that is something that happens. And so I think it's interesting that that's a valid point. There's a lot of these rulings that are pretty, it's not, makes them look really bad. Now, it's a former senior law enforcement official who spoke on the condition of anonymity, citing fear of retaliation, which is telling, said he was struck by the large amount of resources the DOJ put into the investigation of Garcia. Quote, they came hard at a relatively low-level guy, which does not necessarily make it improper, just odd. Perhaps they wanted the last word, which seems childish, said the former official. Typically, you work up the chain, not down it. That said, at least he gets his due process rights this time around. There's nothing that everything I agree with every single thing he said. On top, and the idea that you would retroactively understand what when they started the investigation based on the sealing date, they were already publicly saying he's never coming back. That's never going to happen, knowing they were building a case to try to do that. It's just flatly dishonest everywhere you look. It's all politically motivated. They'll lie about anything to make themselves not look like they lost or that they somehow were, it's petty in every sense of the word. But the point is is that that they went to the lowest, somebody who, putting this much effort into somebody who is based on everything they have, at best, you could argue somebody who's connected to these things. And their evidence is not even for that, other than what they say they're going to present, which maybe that'll show it. And that'll be due process, and that's all we really called for. Down here it says, in an unusual move, Bondi also described the allegations against Garcia that were not included in the indictment. Now, this is a really important point that people skip over. Now, I'll read this first. I think it says, she said that co-conspirators alleged that Garcia, quote, solicited nude photographs and videos of a minor and, quote, played a role in a murder of a rival gang member's mother. For decades, attorney generals from both parties and state and local prosecutors have generally accused defendants of crimes only for which a grand jury indicted them, which that's not proof, you understand. That's simply based on evidence, but an accusation that has yet to be proven in court. And there's plenty of indictments that prove out to be completely baseless that have been concocted by the prosecutors. But the point is that historically, not only is it not usual that they would point out things that aren't in the indictment, but it is considered an abuse of power. So discussing other potential crimes, like they just did, saying, well, these are being accused of things that were not even included in the indictment, long been regarded as abuse of prosecutorial power, risking unfair harm to defendants' reputations, which is why they do it. It's the court of public opinion. So what it's showing you is that Bondi firing people that say what we know is now correct, or them doing something that is considered to be like not just lacking decorum, but like wildly irresponsible, if not like, yeah, it's not illegal, but it is dishonest. I mean, there's a word I'm looking for there. The point is that what they're doing is manipulative. They're doing this knowing they're not even trying to accuse them of that or even try to prove those things in order to get the people out there watching to assume that, just like they did to start. Rapist, terrorist, gang member, leader of the gang, human trafficking. And then that all clearly collapsed in front of them. And they started scrambling to make this case up. It's just so dishonest. A former senior Justice Department official who requested anonymity, citing fears of retaliation, said that Bondi often speaks as a partisan Trump loyalist, not a neutral law enforcement official, which is obvious. Whether that person themselves is politically motivated, that is transparent. Quote, she says the president, and let's be clear, all sides. I mean, look at KJP and Biden. It's the same thing, guys. These people lie as a matter of policy. It says, she says the president's name every time, said the former DOJ official. She talks more like a politician stumping for a candidate than an attorney general who is out there talking independently. Because that's how we pretend it's supposed to be, right? They're only investigating, going after crimes, and they're not there for Trump. They're there for the government, for the American people. But we see how this plays today. Now, not that that's always been the case, but at least that's what they project. Today, that mask is off. And it says, you can see that in the words that she uses. The Wall Street Journal reported Friday that people close to the matter said the indictment prompted the resignation of a veteran career prosecutor who headed the criminal division at the office, and the case was filed. The Journal did not name the prosecutor. However, days after the indictment and a federal grand jury in Nashville, Ben Schrader, the head of the criminal division, resigned. I mean, it's like with the COVID thing. And you're seeing FDA and CDC people resign in protest because they're calling them out for crimes. It says something. Now, it doesn't always mean that they're right, but it says something. Now, Michigan Advance platform says federal prosecutors in Nashville asked judge to keep Garcia detained until trial. Based on what is, it's all, if you're just accusing them of terrible things, that's not usually enough to justify keeping them in prison. There needs to be some kind of a background. It seems, I think this all seems very politically motivated. It says Berger Garcia was returned to Nashville from El Salvador on Friday to face criminal charges of human smuggling charges tied to a 2022 traffic stop. Realize Bondi just said 2021 on a recent discussion. It just shows you how completely they're not. I don't even think that people are making decisions, to be honest. It's how I feel right now. But it says he appeared briefly in a downtown Nashville courtroom on late Friday and is scheduled to return to court this Friday, so coming up this week, for a formal arraignment of the charges against him. I'm very interested to see what happens here. Now, not in the arraignment, like as this goes forward, to the actual presentation of evidence and the ability to push back on it. But it says a federal grand jury indictment issued under seal on May 21st. No longer, but there's a reason they did it under seal, because they didn't want you to know it was being built, because that made them look really stupid. Look for yourself. Many examples post May 21st, they were claiming that, not going to happen. But it says it made public June 6th, the charges with, quote, conspiracy to unlawfully transport illegal aliens for financial gain and unlawfully transport of illegal aliens for financial gain. Wait, it says unlawfully transport illegal aliens for, conspiracy to, and then the actual act. Now, it says Garcia, quote, knowingly and unlawfully transported thousands of undocumented aliens for profit between 2016 and 2025. A member of MS-13 gang, they said. Okay. It says the criminal charges stem from November 2022 traffic stop. Okay, but wait a minute. You just said 2016. You're claiming you have evidence that shows in 2016 up until 2019, and then through that 2025, that he was a human trafficker. You're claiming he abused women. You're claiming that he was a gang member, a leader, no less. And then for some untold reason, Donald Trump's administration in 2019 gave him a withholding of removal. They investigated the case because they must have, right? Because they would not do that. And they said, you can stay here because you're not a risk. That's what they said. How does that make sense, guys? How do you rationalize this without acknowledging that the Trump administration either didn't do its job or it didn't care? Or, in a third option, that was the reality and then they manufactured this today and just backwardly built this case based on the statements of people for who knows how that works out. It's with how many times they've been caught, not just lying, but like forcing others to lie, contorting information, manufacturing things. How do we take this at face value? If that's the case, if it's based on just people saying, I know he did this and that, there's usually more than that needed to make something like this stick. 2016, it says. I just think that's very telling. But of course, the people making this case will make it all about Biden somehow, even though that doesn't really make much sense. Criminal charges stem from November 2022 traffic stop, which they then let him go with a citation. So the cops that were there let him go, feeling that there was not enough evidence to make this make sense. Then Trump's administration, or rather before that, Trump's administration allowed him to stay when they say from 2016 forward, he was a criminal. I mean, if you're claiming all of this stuff was happening and it was so transparent, how did you not know that then? It says prosecutors now allege that further investigation revealed that the stop involved a Garcia smuggling migrants. I mean, how is it even possible that the Trump administration in 2025 can further investigate a single traffic stop from 2022? They can read over the documents that were there, track people down. But even then, you're going to tell me that their recollection about something 5 years ago? I mean, it just doesn't make much sense from a logical perspective. It says that an immigrant from El Salvador, Abrego Garcia, had received an immigration court order in 2019 that allowed him to reside in the United States and specifically barred the federal government from deporting him to El Salvador, where he faced gang violence. That's Donald Trump's administration, acknowledging the same body of evidence and in allowing him to stay. The prosecutor's memo seeking Abrego Garcia's detention until trial, filed in federal court Monday, get this, alleges there is a serious risk that Garcia and or persons acting on his behalf will obstruct justice and or intimidate the witnesses against him. Should be he released from federal custody, then why'd you allow him to stay here from 2019 until 2025? You can't really rectify those two things, guys. They also argued Garcia was a flight risk and danger to the community. Again, a danger to the community, but you allowed him to stay there until 2025. In their memo, prosecutors said the plan to raise allegations that children without legal immigration status were transported and, quote, used in unsafe ways to avoid detention or Garcia's illegal smuggling activities, they claim. Garcia has not been charged with crimes involving transport of children. Just think about the disgusting irresponsibility of claiming child trafficking without that even being included in the indictment. That's Pam Bondi for you, or more likely, whoever's puppeteering what she says. Here's the indictment. You can read through it. It'll probably just frustrate you. We went over this in the past show. I just want to include it again for you. It's on my server, so it won't go away. Now, I'll include this for you. I'll include the show we did. I'll include the clip here. And I really want to stress again, every single one of these court documents prove exactly, not just with statements, but with evidence presented, with the data we can, with the documents they're claiming make X, Y, and Z case, and you can look at the document that shows that's not the truth. It's right there. But guys, this is why we get suppressed. This is why you get 4 retweets, because this is wildly inconvenient for people with a power structure that rely on people without brains. Anybody who's honest out there with intelligence is going to go, oh, wow, that's interesting. Well, let's look at the actual data. Let's see what it says. Here's what Jones is screaming. What does the document say? We see that's not allowed to be the case. You're supposed to point to pieces of paper and claim, that's how the world works today. But I think we're changing that. Not we as in just me and Tila, but us, everybody, you watching, the actual independent media, the people out there who are aware of the partisan illusion. Now, Jason Bassler put this out today. No, I'm not falling for the Elon Trump circus. No, I'm not biting on the LA ICE outrage bait. I'm still here talking about Palantir because that's the story they're desperate to distract you from. Now, I agree. That's, the most likely culprit, but I'm not going to say we know for sure which major thing. Like they said, maybe they thought it was the court documents. Everybody is the thing that they're focused on. But I agree with them. I think this is if it's the only thing, I don't know. But this is, in my opinion, the most central agenda that's being rolled out from a non-partisan perspective. And clearly, even the way Alex Jones, embarrassingly tried to downplay Palantir as some sort of small company lefty thing. Wow, that was embarrassing. People see through it. My point, though, is that first, make sure you understand that these things are being used in a lot of ways, whether real or not, to distract you. But since Jason, myself, the IMA, and just my work in TLAV in general, we've been relentlessly calling out Palantir up until this and post highlighting the database that we've all been calling out. So my point was I didn't need to reiterate all that today. I thought this was important to cover, but I agree with Jason. And Warren Davidson says, beware the, quote, conservative case for digital ID. And highlights Laura Loomer saying, time to deploy Palantir to Los Angeles to deal with the illegals, even though that's most of them, what they're dealing with are actually not. We'd love to see it. If you're lying if you say you wouldn't. Just such desperate projection. If you read the comments, she's just universally hated by so many people. The point is, I think it's desperate to need that to be the case. And you tell yourself that everybody disagreeing is all lefties and Soros and, because otherwise you're probably pretty unhappy. The point is, quote, in conservative, so understand even people that are conservative are calling her a fake conservative because you can see how this plays together. But just recognize how easy it is to see where this leads, whether it's digital ID or every other part of the Great Reset Build Back Better that they pretend they're fighting. Warren sees it. I'll include many different articles, a few of the most important. We talk about Palantir. In case you haven't seen our coverage, welcome to the Palantir World Order. Derek wrote that on April 24th. Here is my show, The Great Palantir Reset, on April 21st. And of course, here is our IMA panel, which I recommend you check out, the Palantir AI Panopticon. Very important. More of those coming your way. And I will leave you. Oh, actually, no, I forgot these were what I added. I think I already included those in the show notes, so I'll leave it there. Well, thank you for tuning in today, guys. I really do think this is an important conversation to have, and that we keep calling this stuff out. I mean, you guys see it. That's why you're here. I mean, I get frustrated, as you can clearly tell, but I'm not going to slow down. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to let it distract me. We have to call these things out. We have to continue to try as best you can, not in a forceful way, not yelling, but try as best you can to show people that, that look at the false nature of this. Look at the arguments. It's obvious that this is a whole of government agenda, or at least just give the source material, show people what we can see. I am genuinely of the mind that most people, like I saw with COVID, like I see with a lot of things right now, are pretty much aware of what's going on. There's different narratives that get people pulled into the partisanship, but it's pretty clear that people are uncomfortable with this. There's a very small grouping, in my opinion. It's a lot of people, but in the context of how much people in this country, I think it's a small group of people that just want to see it all, that just hate people that are in this country, hate brown people, or rather a Zionist vein that hates you too, by the way, and are just desperately, disgustingly forcing this through because of what they want to see, and are then being framed by the illegitimate process and all this as everybody in the parties. Just like with the Democrat thing, illegitimately framed for just everyone supporting everything COVID-19. That wasn't true. You can see that today. Just like on the left and right, people were coerced and forced. But as I said then, it wasn't partisan. People on all sides were seeing through it. Help me fight this, guys. We are making a difference, and you see it every single day. If you want to continue to support this platform, there's plenty of ways down below to do it. It's a value for value. We do this for free. We put the work out because it matters. And it's more important to me that you see it and that you understand, even if you don't care to donate. That's what I care about, and I'll do that every single day of my life, whether or not we ever get a return. But if you want to see us continue, and you want to see this grow, and you want more of this work, show us how valuable it is to you. Thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.